So now that we've completed our sales budget, we can move on to the next lower level budget in the chain, which is the production budget. And in the production budget, we are going to calculate the number of units that we must manufacture in order to have the necessary quantity on hand to meet our sales forecast for the period. This is what the production budget looks like, and we're given the following information. We know that Saratoga Chips is going to begin 2019 with 9,000 bags of chips in inventory, and at the end of each quarter, Saratoga Chips desires to have ending inventory equal to 10% of the next quarter's budgeted amount of bags to be sold. We're going to need a little bit of forward-looking information to prepare this budget, so we're going to say that Saratoga Chips expects to sell 100,000 bags of chips during the first quarter of 2020. Let's start with the budgeted bags to be sold row in the first quarter, and we're going to fill in 100,000. Well, where did I get that number from? I got it from the sales budget. On our sales budget, as you can see, the first row on that budget was budgeted bags to be sold, and we had 100,000 in the first quarter. This is why we need to prepare things in order, because we need information from prior budgets to move on to budgets later in the chain. In the second quarter, as we can see on our sales budget information, we had 110,000 budgeted bags to be sold. In the third quarter, we had 120,000 budgeted bags to be sold. And in the fourth quarter, we had 100,000 bags to be sold, for a total of 430,000 bags. We took this information directly from the sales budget and we just copied it over. Next, we need to figure out our desired bags in ending inventory. Well, we know that this company wants to have bags in ending inventory equal to 10% of the bags to be sold in the following quarter. So during the second quarter, we expect to have 110,000 bags to be sold. If we want to have 10% of that at the end of the first quarter, we simply take the second quarter's budgeted bags to be sold of 110,000 and multiply it by that 10%, and we come up with 11,000. For the second quarter, we know that the next quarter, the third quarter, we expect to sell 120,000 bags, and we want to have 10% of that on hand at the end of the prior quarter, which means the ending inventory for the second quarter is the third quarter's budgeted bags to be sold of 120,000 times 10%, so we get to 12,000. For the third quarter, we go to the following quarter's budgeted bags to be sold, which is 100,000. We find 10% of that, and we realize that Saratoga Chips needs to have 10,000 bags in ending inventory at the end of the third quarter. And then for the fourth quarter, this is where we're going to need our forward-looking information. We know that in the quarter following the fourth quarter of 2019, which would be the first quarter of 2020, we again expect to sell 100,000 bags of chips. If we multiply that by 10%, we realize that Saratoga Chips is going to have 10,000 bags in ending inventory. The column that says total, the best way to think about it is for the year. What is our desired ending inventory at the end of the year? And our desired ending inventory at the end of the year will be the same as our desired ending inventory at the end of the fourth quarter, which was 10,000. So we just move the 10,000 over. For our total bags needed column, or row, we add together the budgeted bags to be sold during the period plus the amount that we want to have in ending inventory. So for the first quarter, our total bags needed is 100,000 plus 11,000, or 111,000 bags to be needed. For the second quarter, we add together our 110,000 budgeted bags to be sold plus the 12,000 that we desire to have in ending inventory, and we come up with 122,000. We repeat this process for the third and fourth quarters. At the end of the period, we realize that we have 440,000 total bags that are going to be needed, just the 430,000 budget bags to be sold, plus the 10,000 desired bags in ending inventory. For our bags in beginning inventory, for the first quarter, that information is given. We know that Saratoga Chips expects to begin 2019 with 9,000 bags in inventory, so we bring that number over to our production budget. For the second quarter, what we're going to do is we're going to carry down the ending inventory from the end of the prior quarter. If we end the first quarter with 11,000 bags in inventory, then we must be beginning the second quarter with that same 11,000 bags. We're going to repeat this process throughout. We ended the second quarter with 12,000 bags in inventory. That means we must begin the third quarter with that same 12,000 bags. And in the fourth quarter, the 10,000 bags in ending inventory for the third quarter become our beginning inventory for the fourth quarter, so 10,000 bags. Again, the total column is for the year. So what amount of bags did we have in inventory at the beginning of the year? We had 9,000, our beginning inventory from the first quarter. To figure out our budgeted bags to be produced, we simply take our total bags needed and we subtract out the bags that we already had at the beginning of the period. So If we need 111,000 bags during the first quarter, but we began with 9,000, that means we only need to manufacture or produce 102,000 bags of chips. And we repeat these steps for each of the other quarters. In the second quarter, we needed 122,000 bags of chips. We started the period with 11,000. That means we need to make 111,000 during the quarter. We need to make 118,000 bags during the third quarter, and we need to make 100,000 bags during the fourth quarter. In total, we're going to have to make 431,000 bags of potato chips during the entirety of 2019. Now that we have our production budget, we can move on to our next budget, which is going to be our direct materials budget. Our direct materials budget is going to calculate the amount of materials that we must purchase in order to meet the requirements that we just figured out in the production budget. And we're going to need two things. We're going to need the amount of material that is needed to make each bag of chips, and we're going to figure out how much each pound, in this case, of potatoes is going to cost us to make one bag of chips. And here's our direct materials budget. We have the following information. It takes 1 pound of direct materials to produce each bag. We're going to begin 2019 with 16,000 pounds of direct materials, or potatoes if you will, in inventory. And at the end of each period, we want to have ending inventory equal to 15% of the next quarter's budgeted bags to be produced. For forward-looking information, we know that Saratoga Chips is going to expect to require 100,000 pounds of direct materials to meet their production in the first quarter of 2020. And throughout the entirety of 2019, these potatoes, these direct materials that we buy, are going to cost us 30 cents per pound. So our budgeted bags to be produced for the first quarter is 102,000. Where did that information came from? It comes from the production budget. When we bring up our production budget, we see on the bottom line that we just finished that our budgeted bags to be produced in the first quarter was 102,000. Right there. We're going to copy over this number for each successive quarter. So during the second quarter, we need to have 111,000 bags of chips. During the third quarter, we need to have 118,000 bags to be produced. And during the fourth quarter, we're going to produce 100,000 bags of chips, for a total of 431,000 bags to be produced during the entirety of the year. Our pounds of direct material per bag is given up on the unit quantity section. It's going to take us 1 pound of potatoes or direct materials to make each bag, and this does not change throughout the entire year. So to figure out our direct materials needed for production, we simply take the bags that we have to produce and we multiply by how much material we need per bag. If we have 102,000 bags that need to be produced, and each bag takes 1 pound of potatoes, that means we're going to need 102,000 pounds of potatoes to meet production during the first quarter. Apply the same concept to each successive quarter. During the second quarter, we have 111,000 bags that need to be produced, and we multiply that by our 1 pound per bag. So we come up with 111,000 pounds of potatoes. We're going to need 118,000 pounds of potatoes in the third quarter and 100,000 pounds of potatoes in the fourth quarter, meaning that in total we're going to need 431,000 pounds of potatoes, which makes sense. We need to make 431,000 bags, and each bag takes 1 pound, so the amount of pounds we need should be equal to the number of bags that we're going to produce. Next up, we have our desired direct materials in ending inventory. And to figure this out, what we're going to do is we're going to take the next quarter's materials needed for production, and we're going to multiply it by that 15% that they want to have at the end of the prior period. If we're going to use 111,000 pounds of potatoes during the second quarter, and we want to have 15% of that on hand at the end of the first quarter, that means we're going to take 111,000, multiply it by 0.15, and we're going to figure out that Saratoga Chips is going to need 16,650 pounds of direct materials at the end of the first quarter. We use this same concept all the way throughout. In the second quarter, we're going to take our 118,000 pounds of materials that we need for the third quarter, we multiply it by the 15%, and we find out that Saratoga Chips is going to need 17,700 pounds of potatoes at the end of the second quarter. For the third quarter, we take the fourth quarter's materials needed, which was 100,000 pounds of potatoes. We multiply that by the 15% that they want to have at the end of the prior period. 100,000 times 0.15 means that they're going to need 15,000 pounds of potatoes at the end of the third quarter. For the fourth quarter, we're going to need our forward-looking information. Since the quarter after the fourth quarter of 2019 is the first quarter of 2020, we need to figure out how many pounds of direct materials we expect to use during the first quarter of that period, which given in our forward-looking information was 100,000 pounds. So we take our 100,000 pounds of potatoes expected to be required, and we multiply that by that 15%, and we realize at the end of the fourth quarter, Saratoga Chips is going to need 15,000 pounds of direct materials. Again, total is for the year. So at the end of the year, what is the amount of materials we expect to have in ending inventory? It is the same that we expect to have at the end of the fourth quarter, or 15,000. To figure out our total direct materials needed, we simply take the direct materials needed for production and add to it the amount that we desire to have in ending inventory. In the first quarter, we need 102,000 for production, and we're going to add to that 16,650 pounds of direct materials we want to have in ending inventory, and we come up with a total of 118,650 pounds of direct materials needed. For the second quarter, same concept. We take our 111,000 pounds of materials needed for production. We add to that our 17,700 pounds of materials that we want to have in ending inventory, which means that our total direct materials needed during the second quarter is 128,700. In the third quarter, we take our 118,000 pounds of materials that are needed for production. We add the 15,000 pounds that we want to have in ending inventory. We're going to need 133,000 pounds of direct materials in the third quarter. And through the same concept, we're going to need 115,000 pounds of direct materials during the fourth quarter. All in all, we are going to need 446,000 pounds of direct materials, or potatoes, for 2019. Our next line is direct materials in beginning inventory. For the first quarter, this number is given in our information. We know that we have 16,000 pounds of direct materials in inventory. We just fill that in. For the second quarter, our beginning inventory is going to be equal to the amount of direct materials that we had in ending inventory at the end of the prior quarter. Well, we know that was 16,650 pounds of direct materials. So we carry down our ending inventory for the first quarter, which becomes our beginning inventory for the second quarter. And we're going to repeat this process for the third quarter and for the fourth quarter. The total column, again, is for the year. So how many pounds of materials did we have in beginning inventory at the beginning of the year? We had 16,000. To figure out the amount of materials that we need to purchase in each quarter, we simply take the amount of materials needed and we subtract what we already have, which is the materials in beginning inventory. So for the first quarter, we take the 118,650 pounds of materials needed, and we subtract from that the 16,000 pounds of materials that we have in beginning inventory, which means we're going to need to purchase 102,650 pounds of direct materials. We apply this same concept to each quarter, taking the total direct materials needed for that quarter and subtracting from it the materials that we have in beginning inventory. For the second quarter, 128,700 minus 16,650 means that we need to purchase 112,050 pounds of direct materials. In the third quarter, we're going to need to purchase 115,300 pounds of direct materials. And in the fourth quarter, since we need 115,000 pounds of total direct materials, but we're starting with 15,000, we only have to purchase 100,000. Which means that in total, we're going to have to purchase 430,000 pounds of direct materials. To figure out how much that costs, we're simply going to take that number and we're going to multiply it by our unit cost per pound of direct materials, which given in the information is 30 cents, and it does not change throughout the entire period. So for the first quarter's cost of our material purchases, we take our 102,650 pounds of direct materials that we need to purchase, and we multiply it by the 30 cent per pound cost to determine that buying that necessary quantity of direct materials is going to cost us $30,795. And we're going to repeat this process for each successive quarter. So in the second quarter, we need to buy 112,050 pounds of materials. When we multiply that by 30 cents, we come up with a budgeted cost of direct material purchases for the second quarter of $33,615. For the third quarter, we have 115,300 pounds of materials that need to be purchased. At 30 cents per pound, that means we're going to spend $34,590. And in the last quarter, to get our 100,000 pounds of materials, we're going to have to spend $30,000. Which means that our total direct material purchases for 2019, Saratoga Chips is going to spend $129,000 acquiring direct materials.